If you own a boat, you're probably going to end up with a couple of these at some point. So the first thing you're going to need to do is make sure you've got a good, clean surface. Also some PPE, some eye protection, some gloves. We're going to be using a little bit of acetone and a piece of Scotch-Brite pad. Hard to beat for just cleaning the surface initially. You can kind of already see the little bit of dirt and residue coming off of there. There we go. That's a good start. Now, acetone is highly flammable if you've never dealt with it before. Typically, we're gonna have some fans running, and it's always a good idea to wear a quality respirator of some kind. This one is made by 3M. They make some very good products. Now, next step, if you got some compressed air, that's great. Kind of blow any fumes away. And then, I like a little Wagner heat source. Kind of warm that up and dry it out. Sometimes it seems like when you clean something with some acetone, you'll almost get a little bit of condensation. Now, not a bad idea before we start sanding with some 120 grit paper is border the edges around your work area just to kind of help keep it tight and minimize the chance of you scratching part of your boat. Some 120 grit is hard to beat for all around, although you could use anywhere from 80 to 220. And we're just gonna get in there and do a little bit of surfacing around the outskirts all the way out to the tape. Just a light scuff is all you need, but we wanna add a little bevel to that. Surface prep is key. If you don't prep the surface properly, the repair is not gonna hold, it's not gonna stick. We've already pre-made a putty of sorts, and it's quite easy to make a putty of your own. And there's a couple basic ingredients if you have them, or if you want to put together a little kit of supplies and materials in your shop. This is called a colloidal silica. You can buy this from our friends there at Fiberglass Warehouse, can source you for all of your Gelcoat and your fillers. Everything we're using today, be sure to take advantage of their Fish Bump TV discount code, save a bunch of money. And any other tools we're using for y'all's convenience, I'll be sure to put a link in the description below our video. But I'm gonna show y'all the basics of how we would make it. Matter of fact, let me put this in a clear cup so you folks at home can see a little better. Let's just go with a couple ounces of Gelcoat. That would be plenty for a ding that size. I'm gonna put the mask on when we're mixing the colloidal silica. But let's just say we put 1 spoonful, maybe a spoonful and a half of the colloidal silica. And then we're gonna use a little bit of the 1/4 inch milled fibers. That is gonna make it considerably stronger. That's gonna reinforce your gel coat and make more like a putty. And it's quite easy to mix that material in until you get the consistency putty that you want. And you can see just that quick, we've made a fiber reinforced putty, and I found it to be much stronger with some of the fibers. The only thing is you don't want to use it on your final coats. You want to use it as a base to fill thicker holes. This is some old signboard material that's about 1/8 inch, and it's plastic, and it's a non-porous surface. In my opinion, it's very important not to use like cardboard as your mixing surface because it's porous and it can soak a lot of the solvents out of your putty, and that's not good. It can throw the ratios or the chemical composition of it off. So I like something, whether it be aluminum or like a non-porous plastic. Now, important to remember that we are using Gelcoat without wax. I generally prefer to purchase Gelcoat without wax, and then what I might do is purchase something like the Surface Seal from Fiberglass, and that is added to the Gelcoat if you want to make Gelcoat with wax in it. And just for a reference today for everybody, we're dealing with 30 degrees Celsius or 87 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's quite warm Catalyst is going to be mixed according to how fast you want it to dry and your temperature. So right now we're dealing with fairly hot temps, so I'm probably going to go down on the lower side. So for example, if we had 1 ounce, it would be close to about 10 drops of MEKP, or methyl ethyl ketone peroxide, is going to be your activator. Now again, if you order Gelcoat like from Fiberglass Warehouse, they're going to send you some of the MEKP with, and you may want to specify that you want Gelcoat without wax, and then you need some wax additive. We are just going with a tiny little splash. We really only need about 5 to 10 drops. That ought to be plenty. We're going to cut that in very thoroughly. Remember, MEKP or catalyst is not good to be on your skin, in your lungs, on your shirt. It's bad stuff. So don't be scared of it, but be cautious of it. You do not want it on your person. I like to kind of roll it and cut it, and then you want to be sure it's off the blade. Generally, I'm going to say about 1 minute of mixing. But remember, the clock starts as soon as you mix, and you probably only have about 10 minutes at most before it starts to thicken up. If you're new to the channel, I want to welcome everybody. My name's Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop. I'm a second-generation professional boat builder and a 100-ton licensed captain. Our family has been building and repairing boats in our shop here since the 60s, and we're happy to share what our family's learned over generations with all you DIYers at home. And if you're finding the information helpful and want to support the channel, feel free to give us that thumbs up, like, subscribe, comment, share, tell a friend. Certainly appreciate it. Thank you all so much. Okay, so here we go, everybody. We got this kind of bordered off there, and I like to work this material in quite well. I don't want to just do one pass from one direction, and that's where putting some tape on there can be really helpful, because you don't have to be as worried about getting a little bit outside of the edges. And don't worry about perfection, everybody. Like, sometimes people really get worked up about getting it perfect, and you're gonna have multiple passes at this. If it doesn't look perfect on one pass, you can always sand a little bit of material off and start over again. It's really not a big deal. Now, sometimes getting a radius or soft corner can be tricky. In a lot of cases, the best thing to do is just leave it sharp like that. That's actually quite all right. I don't know, it's going to be a tricky camera angle from underneath there, but we kind of wrap that or roll that right under. And generally this stuff, if you were trying to get this done in one day, you could give this an hour or so of cure time and be ready to touch it up a little bit and come back with an additional coat. I also love to keep a bucket with a little bit of acetone and a brush in there, and it's very easy to just take a little bit of that acetone and clean off your board, and you are ready for the next pass. The same for your little putty blades. If you don't do this, you're going to be dealing with a bunch of cleanup. Definitely going to take you a little more time, and time is money. We want to spend your time out there either doing effective things on the boat or actually using the boat. Go fishing or water skiing or whatnot. All right, everybody, so it's been overnight and our Gelcoat has fully cured where we applied it yesterday. Now, that was the reinforced Gelcoat with the short strand fiberglass fibers in it. Now, we've got a fairly sharp little ridge, but it's slightly lower than the area around it, which is really what I wanted. I don't want those fiberglass fibers on the surface layer. I just want them as a bulk filler and to kind of reinforce underneath. But I am going to take a little bit of 120 grit. You could use 120, you could use 220. And I've made some little blocks here. Matter of fact, somewhere around here, I've got a whole bucket full of blocks that I've made of different assorted sizes. And again, for you DIYers at home, you don't have to buy custom-made sanding blocks. You could do this all by hand. But I'm going to just fold that over the edge, and we're going to use that blue masking tape as a guide and just knock that ridge down a little bit We want it below the area around it, just slightly, not a lot, just a little. Now this is again something that just a little bit of practice and a little bit of feel is gonna go a long way. I have been doing this since I was a boy. I've done thousands of repair jobs, but even then, sometimes folks, you're gonna have stuff go a little sideways on you. Don't let that throw you off. Don't let it discourage you. It's typical, it's normal, it's part of doing this. Another method that you can use when you get down a little bit tighter, rather than using sandpaper, is you can actually use a razor blade to scrape or draw these little ridges. If the camera will pick it up, if you get in there really, really tight, you can see a little subtle ridge. And if I hold this blade really nice and flat, you can actually see there that it's just peeled that little ridge right away without any issue. I've still got a little bit of blue tape underneath. I'm gonna use the razor blade to help me grab that. We're gonna go back to the sandpaper just a smidge. You can actually, again, touch up on that corner and get a nice radius or radii that matches the rest of the boat. But this a little bit of sanding further out is not a problem, because that is what we're gonna do. We call that feathering. And a lot of times you want to scuff ever so slightly out kind of around the perimeter. Now you can do some wet sanding as well if you want to keep down the dust. That's pretty common as we move into finer grits, but you certainly can do that as well, even with 120. Nice circular motion there. Now we're using just a base white gel coat on this repair. There's probably a good chance we're going to end up painting this boat maybe a different color altogether. We might go gray, like to match our 29 in the background, or we might go something else. If anybody at home needs me to help them directly, I don't know if I mentioned it already in this video, but Patreon is the way to do that. That way you can contact me. You can send pictures. It's an hourly consulting fee, basically. And I can help you with whatever project you're working on, whether it be gel coat repair or a full-on boat rebuild or new construction just from scratch. Would love to assist and help in any way I can. Wet sanding certainly helps control the dust, and it also keeps your sandpaper nice and clear. Some compressed air is really nice, and honestly, like when we were doing like insurance repair work for big companies, they expected it to be perfect, but compared to the chunk or the gouge that was knocked out of this thing, even you folks at home, if you just want to do something like that just to get through the summer, at least we don't have exposed glass fibers and a big ugly chunk out of the boat. But we're going to take it on to the next phase. Now, a little bit of acetone is not a bad idea. I'm just going to give it a little mist to kind of clean and dry things out. We're going to warm that up, and the next phase, we're going to make a slightly thickened gel coat and get ready for another fill. Okay, folks, here we go with our gel coat, again, without wax, from Fiberglass Warehouse. Again, folks, remember to take advantage of their discount code FishBumpTV. They got everything you're going to need for your next boat project. Been real happy with their gel coat especially, and they're also the same folks that make the vinyl ester resins that we use a lot. So we're just going with maybe an ounce or two. Maybe that's probably around 1 ounce, just guesstimating. We don't need an awful lot. Now we're going to be using a little bit of fumed silica, or sometimes we refer to it as colloidal silica. That's a good thickener. I want to wear a mask this time. I recommend you probably do the same when you're at home. I got a little bit off to the side here. We're just going to add a little bit, and we're going to see how it looks. Generally, pretty equal volumes are going to be about right. So if you had about 1 ounce by volume of gel coat, starting out with like 1 ounce of colloidal silica, You can see that's already thickening up quite nicely. Now once it is integrated a bit, just like that, you're fine. Now again, obviously the gel coat will put off some fumes as well, but in the amounts we're dealing with, in open air, especially if you got some good fans around you, that looks almost like cottage cheese, but you want to mix that until the lumps and bumps are out of there. Sometimes that takes a couple minutes of mixing. This time, no milled fibers. We're not trying to reinforce this. We just kind of want a slightly thickened version. And the nicer your boat is, the more particular you're gonna have to be about this. This project boat is pretty rough, honestly. Gel coat's pretty beat up. But as I said in the previous segment, sometimes if you're in the middle of summer and you've knocked a big chunk out of your boat, you do not want exposed glass fibers. And if you can just at least seal it up, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect cosmetically to be a good thing. I think I'm gonna want that a tiny bit thicker. I'm gonna add just a half a spoonful, if even, and integrate. A lot of times what I will do is, even like once I've got the amount that I think I'm gonna need, I may transfer it to a board and then use a little flexible blade such as this. Now a lot of times, again, I'll take these bigger Bondo blades and you can take a razor knife and cut them down to the size you want. But you may have to mix this for a couple minutes to get it really nice and creamy. Ultimately, you do not want any of those lumps or bumps. I've been seeing some really cool stuff. I may have mentioned already in this video, but our Facebook group page, I was on there this morning. You guys are doing some fantastic work. Congratulations on all the projects that you folks are working on. I'm glad the channel is here to maybe help give you some inspiration. I'm glad there's other viewers out there that are helping to answer some questions. Really encouraging even for me to see. I'm impressed. I had a gentleman the other day comment. He said, I'm a little confused. I see you do it this way and I see you do it that way. Just remember, folks, there's more than one way to do it. I know I've said that before, but don't, just because I'm doing it this way today, and if you see another method on the channel that I show, you can use either method, whichever one looks better to you or whichever materials are more readily available. I kind of grew up down here when I was a boy. There weren't a lot of options, and you kind of had to be pretty flexible and work with whatever you could get. All right, that looks pretty darn good, and that's probably really more than we need. Now sometimes what you can do, you may set a little bit of that off to the side. Like I've got some wax paper here, or if I had another mixing board, say for example you're like, well, that is way more than I know I'm going to need for fill. You may want to put a little dab of it just off to the side, and we can always come back, and if we need to do a second fill, we don't have to remix our putty. We're going with MEKP here. Generally, as a rule of thumb, like 1 ounce is going to be 10 to 20 drops. This is probably a ½ ounce or 1/4 of an ounce. I mean, it's just going to take a few drops. I like to make a little divot in the middle. Just trying to get a couple drops there. Come on. There we go. That is more than enough. Matter of fact, sometimes if you put a little more in than you think you need, it's there in that little divot there. You can take a little rag and touch some of that and get some of that back out of there. We do want this to kick off fairly fast today, but it is also quite hot. And on days like today, I think we got a heat index of over 97, but we're looking at 88.9 or 31.6 Celsius. So that'll give you all a reference. Remember, the hotter it is, the less catalyst you need. I like the little flexible spreaders, but sometimes like a little sheetrock blade. This we picked up, I believe, at our local Lowe's. But you can certainly improvise. And then remember, we did sand out a bit, and I did go ahead and border this a little bit more. That first fill is going to look really rough. Second fill, things are going to be a lot better. It's going to be much closer to profile. You can see how nice and smooth that is. This boat was in pretty rough condition, as many project boats are, but you can build them back better than they were from the factory. Now this, I'm not really worried again about that little crisp edge. You can kind of make yourself crazy trying to get that radiused and smooth, but a lot of times it's better just to fill it and then let that tack off, lightly sand it. Right here we've got a little bit of thickness built up over our tape, and if the gel coat cures over the tape, sometimes it can be a little bit of a bear to remove. So once we've got our application done, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and pull our masking tape so that it's not a problem with removal once it tacks off. Now it's not impossible to remove it if you wait for that step, but it might save you a little bit of hassle. Now sometimes you can also, before that even sets, you can take your blade and you can kind of soften that edge just a little bit, kind of blend it in so it's not so crisp. You don't have such a hard edge there. That's one of those little tidbits. But again, if you forget to do that, don't panic, don't freak out. Just sometimes it's going to be a little trickier. You might have to use a razor blade to kind of help the tape get off of there. We've given it a couple hours of cure time. It actually feels quite nice, fairly crisp there, and I think we're pretty good on the fill. Now this would be the point where you got to decide, do I want to try to wet sand this out, like say go 200, 400, 600, 800, maybe 1200 and polish it? Or would we want to put one more coat of gel coat on there, unthinned or maybe even reduced a little bit with some clear additive or some wax additive, and blend it out into the surrounding area? So what I'm going to go ahead and do though, I think I'm going to knock down a little bit with some 220, which is fairly aggressive. A lot of times you might want to start with like 320 or 400, but I've got a little experience here, and again, this is an older boat. Now, one of the tricks of the trade is the 3M dry guide coat. This kind of helps me highlight, show where we've sanded, where we haven't sanded, and it's a great little tool. Again, I'll put a link to this in our video's description. Our Amazon store has a ton of this stuff, so anything y'all need for your convenience, it's there. Let's hit that with a little bit of water and just kind of see how it looks with some 220. Nice and easy. And we're hitting this fairly fresh, but it'll sand quite nice fairly early. Now, I don't know that I would do a lot of polishing real quick. I might give it another day or two to kind of tack off. But you can see with wet sanding and with the dry guide coat, still a little low down there. It's showing our edges and borders. I'm not going to go real far with the 200. I'm just going to kind of knock the big stuff off. Yeah, see how well the dry guide coat is? It's showing that low area and that original divot, but we still got plenty of material. Now, obviously, this white here is a true white, much whiter than what the original boat is, and that's okay for what we're doing here. Obviously, if you were matching your boat, you would want to call the factory and see if you could get some factory gel coat. Or I do have videos on tinting your gel coat. Or one really cool thing to consider, if you reach out to Fiberglass Warehouse and want some of their gel coat, you can actually go to a Sherwin-Williams store and pick out one of the paint codes or chips. So if it's an off-white and it's leaning toward gray, for example, and if you find a color chip that's very, very similar to your boat, if you call Fiberglass Warehouse and give them the Sherwin-Williams paint code, they can do a custom mix for you folks. So I think that's like a really, really cool option, and it might help some of you folks with some older boats and you're just trying to get close. We're making good headway. Just want to keep that gel coat buildup out of your paper. That is one of the big things with wet sanding, is it doesn't have dust continually clogging up your paper. You want to stay quite focused too on the spot. That is one of the things sometimes people sand out way too far, and you're going to want to initially stay very tight to the repair and not go way out on the edges. That's a pretty darn good initial cut though for the 220, I would say. Again, I've got a lot of experience and you got to be careful. You can go a lot further than you think with 220. Oh yeah, that's starting to look very respectable. Now once the guide coat is gone per phase, you do not want to keep sanding. So I'm pretty happy with that. Maybe just a tiny smudge. I could see a little bit of the guide coat, and again, the camera just can't even get underneath there. It's a very awkward angle. But what we're doing right now is we are actually prepping this because we are going to be adding more gel coat, and we're going to be seeing if we can't get a good color match outside of that base white that we have going on right now. Now, the one good thing about this dry guide coat is it also helps me see where I have sanded and where I have not sanded. And that's pretty important if you're going to be spraying or adding more gel coat, because you want to surface this well. Matter of fact, you can really see the little imperfections. That's part of the dry guide coat, is it'll show you everywhere where there's a nick or a chip. Now, typically, when we're doing this, I like to use 220 grit. You could probably get away with 120, but 220 seems to be a happy all-around medium when it comes to putting a good surface on your old gel coat that your new gel coat will stick to. Once we sand down here, we can see the original color a little better. If you look up here, it's kind of chalked out and faded. This is definitely more of an off-white. So if you're going to be matching gel coat, you're going to want to sand it a little bit. Now you probably want to go with something a little bit finer in a inconspicuous area, or polish it a bit to try to get back to the true color. Dry that off a bit. Now honestly, you don't need a huge compressor if you're doing these smaller repairs. Homeowner grade stuff can work just fine. Something in the neighborhood of 5 horsepower and 20 gallons or better would be great. Now one thing about the acetone too is it'll help take some of the 3M, the dry guide coat, out of some of these little imperfections. It'll kind of clean that out of those scratches so that they're not showing up if you want to make them go away. I'm going to move some of those acetone fumes along and just throw a little bit of heat. Now remember folks, I repeat myself all the time, folks that follow the channel know this, acetone is highly flammable, so no open flames. You want to be sure there aren't any heavy fumes around before using a heat source to warm up that, and that's going to help dry off any moisture on the surface, because that is very important to getting a good bond with your gel coat. So we're getting ready to kind of think about mixing some colors up. Now I have went ahead and, to save a little bit of time, I have custom mixed some gel coat, and you can see that is an off-white by nature. It's not a stark white. Generally when we're doing gel coat matches, most gel coats are going to be like an off-white to the tone of the browns and yellows with maybe a little bit of red. Now there's a couple different ways you can go about getting a match. A lot of times what I will do is maybe put down a little bit of brown pigment if I think I'm going to be using some browns. If I need a little bit of red, and I want to typically dilute this in one way or the other, because if you just put a little splotch of white gel coat down, it is very, very easy to add too much pigment. And I'm telling you from personal experience, you can be really close to having a good match, and then one drop too much yellow or red, and all of a sudden you've got yellow or pink gel coat. But a lot of times what I may do is add some of our base color. And I'm assuming most people out there have a white boat or an off-white boat. Obviously, if you got a boat of a different color, you're gonna have to work with something different. Now, a couple other items you might need, the little, like stirring sticks. These come from Hobby Lobby, or a lot of the other fiberglass supply places have like tongue depressors and coffee stirring sticks. These can work really good for just kind of mixing that white into your pigment. Same for the red. It doesn't have to be 100% necessarily. And for the yellow. When you're adding these tints, generally I'm going to be in a little cup like so. And we got just our base white as a reference, for example. And most off-whites, you're going to be going with some brown. So pretty easy to take that and just a couple little drips and drops. Let's kind of see where we go. That's probably good enough to just get a general idea. You can see that's already moving toward an off-white. Now, a lot of times you're going to need a little bit of yellow added. If you're just using a brown pigment, a lot of times a little bit of yellow seems to be something to get you in the neighborhood. We're working with our lighting the best we can here, folks. You can see we've moved a little more toward the yellow. And then there again, let's go with just a little bit of red. Just 1 or 2 drops. Maybe you got to be real careful with red. You will end up with pink. Ask me how I know. I've done that. I've done that before. And then sunlight is your best light if possible, or like a fairly high Kelvin, like a daylight bulb, if you can go that direction. And you can see how quickly there we're getting to a nice off-white. You can see how quickly we just kind of walk that over from a base white, kind of brown, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red. And sometimes you can kind of just hold the stick up there before you even touch it and see how close you are. You can see that is definitely a stark difference. When it comes to surface sealant, now this would be the most common when we would use, sometimes it's called a modifier C or wax solution or surface seal. And this can be added to your gel coat in a pretty similar percentage to like if you were adding catalyst. So let's say in the neighborhood of 2 to maybe 3 or even 4%. A lot of times I'll just pour a little bit in the cap, and I'm just going to kind of wing it here, and then right into our mix. You mix that in, apply it to the surface. It's going to dry pretty much tack free, and that is typically what most people are going to do. Now, I mentioned styrene. I've got some over here. This is a styrene monomer, and you'll notice what I poured in there from the wax solution was very thin and clear, and that's what the styrene is, basically the foundation of that. Now, traditionally, a lot of people, if they wanted to thin gel coat, you can also use some of the styrene monomer, but generally you don't want to thin it more than about 5%. It's a pretty light ratio to thinning that out, because if you do too much, you can get into discoloration. Now, I added some wax in there already, and there's another option that you can use that I was talking about earlier, was the air dry super clear additive. This is some really cool stuff. It is designed to be mixed with gel coat, and that's what it looks like. If y'all want to see it, they call it a super clear. It does have a little bit of a amber color to it. Now, I have had this gallon around for a few months, and sometimes it shifts a little bit in color, but doesn't appear to affect the actual coloration of your gel coat at all. Now, if you add the clear to your gel coat at up to a 50% ratio, so it'd be like 1 part of the clear, 1 part of the gel coat, it is going to allow this stuff to spray and flow out beautifully, almost like paint. And again, I've got other videos here on the channel where we're spraying gel coat and going into more detail on that. But I wanted to show you folks that even though I added a little bit of the surface seal, or if you have gel coat with wax in it, you can come back in, and again, I'm winging this a little bit, y'all. I'm just kind of eyeballing everything, but you can go back up to like, say, 50% with the clear additive and mix that in, and what that's going to give you is a gel coat that is going to flow and spray much, much nicer. If you If you just have gel coat right out of the can or container, sometimes it's going to be quite thick. And if you don't thin it with some styrene or thin it with the clear additive, it's going to be really difficult to spray it. All right, folks, so we've done all of our prep work. We mixed our gel coat, and now we're down to spraying options. What are we going to use? Now, this is just a fairly inexpensive 1.5 millimeter, which is fairly small for spraying gel coat, but on a little touch-up area like this, you kind of want a small tip on it. Now, the least expensive option you can go for would be just a Prevail sprayer. Now, this rig here is about $100. These are about $10. So I think today we're just going to go with the least expensive option. And if you want more info on spraying, we have other videos where we test some different spray rigs and whatnot. But for today, a little bit of touch-up. Let's go with the Prevail. We're going to go with about 2 ounces today, and we're going to run this through a fine screen just to be sure we don't catch any debris. 2 ounces is going to be a world of plenty. Honestly, 1 ounce would probably be fine, but I don't want to starve it, and we have enough. Now, the Prevail sprayer comes with the aerosol canister, and you're going to get in the bigger kit the little mixing jar as well. Now, one thing that's going to be important with gel coat is to remove that little strainer off of the end. Otherwise, you'll get a very poor feed rate. And we're going with 2 ounces, so that'd be half of 4, but we want to go on the strong side, so we're going to go with like 1.25 cc's, or we could go with about 20 drops. Now, you got to be very, very careful with the MEKP, folks. It is highly corrosive, not good to have in the eyes, not good to have on your skin. That ought to be plenty right there. Just be very careful, very cautious. Now, if you order anything from Fiberglass Warehouse, they're going to send you some MEKP. So don't worry about that as far as where do you purchase the bigger containers or gallon jugs of the Norox. That is more of like a bulk quantity, and we use so much gel coat here in the shop that I buy it in bulk sometimes. Now, one thing with catalyzation of gel coat is a really good thorough mix. Mix it left, mix it right. Generally about 1 minute of mixing time. But the clock starts ticking as soon as you put the catalyst in your gel coat. So just remember that. All right, that should be a pretty darn good mix at this point. Going straight to our little jar. You are probably going to need a mask for this. Not a bad idea. Prevail sprayer just screws right on. A lot of times we will test fire it just a little bit to be sure there's not anything weird going on. There we go. You don't want to shake it while you spray it. And we're going to start right on. Just get a base on there. It is spittering and sputtering a little bit, but that will clear up. Now, one trick you can do sometimes to get a little more velocity out of these Prevail sprayers, you do have to be cautious and careful, but if you warm this thing up a little bit, it will help it spray a little better. You don't want to get it hot, but warming it up a bit is not a bad thing. Another little test spray. You do not want to shake this while you're spraying it either. Just kind of keep it nice and smooth. That's coat 2. We're going to give that a minute to kind of flash. Sometimes a little warmth indirectly. We're just trying to help some of these solvents flash off of the gel coat. Now, you do not have to spray this. You could also apply it with a brush, or you could use the larger spray rig there, but you're going to need a spray gun, a hose, a compressor, a little more involved. Just for a reference as well, anybody that's wondering where we are temperature-wise today, we are at 89 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius for everybody trying to figure out where our catalyzation is on things. And I'm just using touch on that. We want it can be warm, but you do not want it hot. A little purge. There we go. I'm going out a little further each time. All right, we're gonna give that a second. You can actually feel the Prevail can getting colder as you spray, so we're just kind of trying to bring it back to somewhat room temperatures or slightly warm. Now, again, obviously, folks, you should be wearing a mask or respirator when you are spraying. Very important. You really can't have a fan running while you're spraying Gelcoat. That's kind of one of the caveats to that, is you definitely can't have any airflow. You want it to be fairly still and fairly calm. Do a little test spray. We're looking good. We're going wider and wider. We're kind of going out to the outer edges of where we sanded. And the clear additive is going to give this a somewhat transparent look. All right, now we can see a little bit of a halo going onto the old there, but that should be pretty darn close. Now remember, you've only got about 10 minutes or so with the Prevail sprayers. A lot of times what folks are going to do, you can either pour anything that's left over back into your mixing cup. We're going to have a little left over there, but it's a good way for you to keep an eye on it and see how it is curing, how it's doing as far as curing. And then you can take a little bit of acetone. It's a pretty simple matter of washing out your little container, and then you would want to put this back on and purge some acetone through it. And these are reusable, although they're cheap enough to be disposable if you need them to be. So I am pretty happy with that, folks. Now, that may not be absolutely perfect, but for the sake of video, I don't know if the camera can lay in here at a low angle and maybe see, that is pretty glossy. Now, folks, you don't have to spend a lot of money or have a lot of money to do this kind of repair. And that's why I love tools that you make at home. This little assortment of blocks has different shapes and contours. And all we've done here is wrap some 320 grit 3M paper on a foam block that I've shaped and contoured for the right size to wrap this paper around. Now, one of the other little blocks I like is sized to fit a standard disc. That is going to be some 400 grit we have going on. Now, when you're getting started with sanding, you don't want to go too aggressive initially. I find that probably 320 or 400 is going to be a good selection. So let's start with some 320. Generally, you're going to go from most aggressive to the finest in succession, and we're going to try to blast through this down. We want to be sure there's no grit or sand or anything in your sandpaper on the surface that you're working on. And let's just start with this more aggressive paper, but we're going to stay right tight to where we sprayed the Gelcoat. You can see already how the guide coat is giving us an indication, showing some of the little imperfections on the surface where we maybe need to focus, where we can work most effectively. We don't want to waste time and energy. Now, one of the mistakes people make a lot of times, I think, with sanding a Gelcoat repair is they get out too far around the edges or outside of where they actually sprayed Gelcoat. And I would recommend staying tight to the initial repair. And with the more aggressive paper, we're not going to do an awful lot of sanding. We kind of just want to knock down the big lumps and bumps there. Clean your paper, clean off the residue. And you can see already we've made a lot of progress just with hand tools. You do not have to have expensive power tools, although it's nice if you do. Sometimes with this finesse work, it's better to do it by hand though, and you're less likely to take off too much material. That is probably one of the things I would have to warn people about, is sanding too aggressively. And honestly, for your initial cut, that is probably gonna be quite all right with the 300 or 320 rather. I think I'm gonna jump right to the 400. Okay, so we're moving right now to some 400, which is a very popular grit and a smaller block. I made that out of a piece of teak, I believe, on another boat project that we were working on. Start from the top, work our way down. Blocks are actually a really good way to get a very true and straight surface. Sometimes with power tools, the pads are going to be a little softer and a little more flexible, and you actually may not get as true a surface. The guide coat can make you a little crazy sometimes because it'll show every little scratch and highlight every little ding and imperfection. But if you're truly trying to sand this out and buff it out, you want to see how far the damage goes. Now on the flip side of this, if you've got some power tools and some compressed air, you certainly could jump right over to a DA or a dual action sander. There again, we're running some 400. This is a Hutchins dual action, a Hutchins, and they are fantastic professional grade power tools. If you're wanting some air tools that'll last a lifetime, I've had this one over 20 years and it has been excellent. I'm just going to do a real quick pass with it. Up, down, back and forth. Notice I'm not staying in one place for a long time. You absolutely want to keep moving. And the idea is to not stay right where a low spot is. Like if you're seeing these little imperfections, you do not want to take the edge of the DA and try to sand that away. You basically want to bring all the other surfaces kind of down to it. Although if it's fairly deep, you got to be very careful not to sand too far. So that's where kind of learning, said in other videos, maybe practicing on an older boat or somewhere on your boat that is less conspicuous. But I actually find it very therapeutic to do this kind of work. I think a lot of people are maybe missing this in their lives these days, and that's why they enjoy rebuilding, repairing, fixing stuff up. Going out a little bit further each time. Now usually 600 to 1200 is going to be the final phase. Sometimes you will go finer than 1200. We're going to go to some 600 at this point. What's cool about these little Velcro sticky pads is that you can save those and use them again. They're not necessarily wore out completely after you go through a phase like this, and with the cost of materials these days, I would recommend using them or getting as much life out of them as you can. I'd love to hear what kind of projects you folks at home are working on. Been very interesting to hear from people all over the country and all over the world. So thank you so much for tuning in. And feel free to comment down below. Let us know what you're working on. And I'd love to hear some content suggestions from everybody. It's always good for us because sometimes you're like, what do we do next? Obviously, we're moving forward with the project boat, stringers, foam flotation, fuel tanks. But even beyond this project boat, what are we going to work on? So your thoughts are greatly appreciated. We're maybe getting a little bit beyond where we initially worked or where we have to go, but I want to try to show you all the full effect. You can see we're a little low right in here. You got to be really careful on these edges with a power tool. And that may be a case where I would shift back, and you can take your disc off of your sander if you've done the bulk of your coverage, and you can certainly use your block and finish out some of the finer details of the 600 grade. Like right here on the corners here, maybe you can see the guide coat is still in place. Corners and edges are going to be tricky, folks. Machines will burn through the gel coat sometimes. That is one of the finesse parts of gel coat repair that gets people sometimes. You just want to go a little while, check your progress. And this boat, a lot of folks may not realize, but this is a project boat we acquired just for content creation for the channel. So this is for you folks at home. And some of the steps we're doing here, I've had some people ask me, like, man, is this boat even worth the time and effort we're putting into it? And you know, sometimes that question is a maybe. We're gonna put a lot of effort into it. It's gonna be a really good boat when we're all done. But the cool thing is the techniques that we're showing you, you can apply to your boat that maybe you've had in your family for a long time, or you don't have a repairman in your area, or just the estimates that you've gotten to do this kind of work are very high. This kind of work can be expensive. And the guys that do it professionally out there, any of you that are watching, it is, they're worth it. Professionals at this have taken years to learn, but in a lot of areas it's hard to find people that do this kind of work anymore. And some older boats, you just can't justify the amount of money it might cost to hire a professional, but you can certainly do a lot of this work yourself. We're going with 800 grit at this point. Rinse, wash, repeat. The finer the grits go, the faster you tend to work through these phases, because you're only taking a tiny bit of material off each pass. All right, here we go. You can see there's a little bit of a low. The guide coat is showing us where we've been. Kind of just working back and forth a little bit up in here. All right, that should do it. There again, we can see the guide coat slightly low right there. There's a little shadowing, but I'm never going to use the edge and try to just make it go away. You want to keep the disc flat. Go back and forth over the whole area. These gouges here are quite deep, so we're not going to be able to sand those out, but sometimes little minor ones you can. It's a feel thing. You got to remember, gel coat on a lot of boats is only as thick as maybe a dime or 5 or 6, 7 sheets of paper. It's not going to be terribly thick. We're going to save this for later. That's not completely worn out. You might use it on another project at some point. And we're going to switch brands. 3M makes good stuff, but I've used this Sunmite before, and we're going to 1200. So we've moved right on through this phase with the 1200 grit on the last pass, and it's pretty exciting at this point. If you get your eyes at a really low angle to the boat, you can actually start to see some gloss and shine developing at that 1200 mark or so, sometimes even sooner. I hope the camera picks that up, by the way. It's kind of one of those things, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But what we've got are a few little scratches, and sometimes there's going to be a little bit of residual, some of the guide coat in there. And acetone works quite well to take some of that out, and a cloth. Now some of those are quite deep. The compound in a lot of phases can take it out as well. But that is typically what you're going to do if you have any of the guide coat as a residual, is just go over it with a little bit of acetone on a rag, and you should be good to go at that point. Now something else to remember, you will notice we've got A white pad on my machine right now, that's going to be for your heavy cut. That's going to be your most aggressive pad. Yellow is going to be a medium cut, and then your blue is going to be more of like a polish and a wax pad. So just remember, not all buffing pads are the same. Now, a lot of times before I start to buff, I do like to use a little compressed air. But just be sure there's nothing on that pad. You're gonna want to be careful not to go this way, it'll grab. If you go in line with it, it's gonna be completely fine. Now again, remember, this is the fast cut, so that's gonna be the most aggressive. And what's cool about this, it does give you some directions here. It tells you a little bit about what it's gonna do and how to work it in. But as a rule of thumb, it's gonna take a couple little dabs. It's about all you need. Sometimes we will brush it over the entire area. You'll find a feel for it. You don't want to go too much, especially after you have some rolling along. You'll kind of find the sweet spot. I also personally like to kind of moisten the buffing pad up just a little bit, and I'm running this thing on a low speed. So that's one of the things about this buffer. This is a Bosch GP71 2VS. That's a variable speed right there. You can kind of speed that up, slow it down. Now I usually like to kind of just work the material into the pad a little bit and start at a low speed, nice and easy. Gonna go left to right, up and down. Just taking my time here. Very important to remember, this thing will grab articles of loose clothing and your cord can get wound up in it. So be sure to keep loose objects, long hair, all that, keep it free from this machine because it'll certainly suck it in there. And just nice and level, up and down, left and right. There we go. I believe we're already making nice, oh yeah. Come on along over here at a nice low angle. I believe you can start to see a shine versus if you move back here a little bit, you can see how flat and dull the original surface is. Now, at this point, you may see some little swirl marks in there and you may decide to go ahead with another pass of compound. It's quite all right at this point to brush a little bit more on and maybe make another pass or two till you're happy with the shine you've got there. Let's go to the yellow. That's gonna sit in just nice and easy, just like so. Sometimes you gotta play around with how they sit in the pad or else they will wobble. We don't want that. Same deal. You might have seen there is a little bit of dust coming out of there. This thing's been in storage for a couple months. We're gonna get some of that residual. Also very important to note, I'm not wearing a mask of any kind right now for audio, but I have a fan moving air this way and one pushing it that way. A lot of these abrasives make dust that you do not want to breathe. So some PPE would be important. Eye protection, gloves, and a good mask while you're buffing and compounding. This is gonna be a little bit finer material. It's gonna get a little more shine out of our Gelcoat surface. Fiberglass Warehouse has some fantastic products and at incredibly competitive prices. I know a lot of you folks out there DIYing this and you're doing this because man, it can be expensive to do this kind of work and you're trying to save a little bit of money. And if you can find a source for it that's going to be less expensive than their competitors, that's going to be a plus. In Fiberglass Warehouse, I've found that they are very, very competitively priced on a lot of their products. Now I'm going to go a little heavy on this initial pass, just because the pad that I'm using right now is like 100% clean. There's no residue compound in there. If you had been compounding a pretty good bit, a lot of times there's residual compound and you don't have to put near that much on. First, let's work it in a little bit. Otherwise, it'll sling material everywhere. Just a light touch is all you need. Now we are starting to get somewhere. Come on over here, maybe we'll get another low camera angle, and you can absolutely start to see we are getting some reflection there and shine. This boat probably hasn't had a shine on it in 10 years or more. So that's pretty cool to see. A lot of times what I may do after we've done some compounding is rinse some of that compound off of there prior to wax application. You can use a garden hose and some car wash, or just a nice biodegradable boat detergent is fine. I've got a little bit of Dawn dishwashing detergent from our sanding mix in there. We're wiping that residue off of there. Each phase now at this point gets to be a little more fun because you can see the results. Now, varying opinions on wax for boats. I like the Colonite Fleet Wax. It's very, very decent. I've been using it for years, but I'm getting a lot of requests to try like some of the polymer waxes and maybe even some of the ceramic coating. So y'all let me know down below if you'd like to see some of that. Maybe time to clean up our 29 after a summer of fishing hard out in the Gulf and cleaning that thing up and waxing. It's probably in line. So let me know if you'd like to see some different products. So this is very important to seal your gel coat at this point. So we have sanded it. We've got some new gel coat in play. You notice I'm kind of going in a circular motion to load that terry cloth towel. We'll start right at the front, and really nice, heavy, overlapping passes. This particular brand of wax does a really nice job. A lot of times I'll do a circular motion. I'll go back and forth. We'll start here at the back again. Circular motion forward. Now this is important. A lot of people don't give the wax a little time to tack off or cure. I find that usually 5 to 10 minutes is the case. So I'm gonna let this stand for about 5 or 10 minutes. So I'm pretty pleased with the results here, folks. Come in here, look down the edge. Now you can really start to see I've already started pulling some of this wax off. You can see right in here, there's a little change in luster or sheen. That is because there's still a little more wax on the surface. I don't know how many of you folks remember Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, Mr. Miyagi there. Sometimes one coat is enough. Not a bad idea to put 2 coats on there if you have the time and you have the material. Take your time with that. Give it a few minutes to cure. There again, maybe you can get a real low camera angle and see the luster and the shine. I'm seeing it real good from this side here. I know y'all want to see the results. Sometimes I don't know till after editing how well the camera picked up what we've done there. But if you remember the big old chunk or divot that we had right out of that corner. Now, gel coat repair, especially on older boats, can sometimes be frustrating if you've never done it, because perfection is pretty hard to achieve. There's almost always going to be some slight variation in color, or sometimes around the edges of where the new material is and the old boat are. You just got, say, 25-year-old gel coat and brand new gel coat, but a lot of times it'll weather in. So if you put it in service, use it a little while, there'll kind of be some blending and fading, and a lot of times it becomes very hard for people to see it or find it. So I am pretty pleased with that result. overall, I hope you folks at home enjoyed the work we put into that video. Remember, if you did, like, subscribe, comment, share, tell a friend. Check out our Amazon store below our video's links. And if you folks at home need any of the Gelcoat that we used, some of the clear additive that we used, and then the aqua blue, if you want to buy this, when you buy it in these larger containers, folks, the price versus what you're going to pay at some of your retail outlets is substantially less. So be sure to check out Fiberglass Warehouse and use your Fish Bump TV code for a discount. Captain Joe here, Island Marine Charters, Fish Bump TV. My son Logan working hard behind the scenes as my amazing cameraman. And we'll catch you folks in the next episode.